Emma Wright, a young schoolteacher, set out on a solo road trip during her summer break, hoping to escape the lingering stress of a difficult year. As twilight descended, she found herself lost on a remote, winding road. Her car's GPS signal was weak, and the dense forest around her cast long shadows that danced eerily in her headlights. Just as panic began to creep in, Emma noticed a flickering neon sign in the distance: the Hollow Pines Inn. It was an old, dilapidated motel tucked into the forest, its dim lights barely cutting through the growing darkness. Despite her unease, Emma decided to stay the night. The next town was miles away, and exhaustion was setting in. Inside, the lobby smelled of mildew and time-worn wood. Faded photographs of past guests cover the walls, their faces obscured by age and grime. Behind the front desk stood Victor Kane, the motel's caretaker. His voice was calm but carried a peculiar edge as he handed Emma the key to room 6 and said, "Stay inside tonight, no matter what you hear." Emma stepped into room 6, which was as drab and lifeless as the rest of the motel. The wallpaper was peeling, the furniture was covered in dust, and the dim overhead light flickered intermittently. She placed her bag on the bed, trying to shake the unease that clung to her. As the hours passed, the quietness of the night grew oppressive. A sudden drop in temperature made her pull the blanket tighter around her. Then came the whispers, soft, indistinct voices drifting through the thin walls. Emma's breath hitched as she strained to listen, but the words were just beyond comprehension. A loud banging from the room next door shattered the silence, followed by what sounded like muffled cries. Emma's heart raced as she remembered Kane's warning. She debated whether to investigate, but decided to step out into the dimly lit hallway. The door to room 7 was slightly ajar, its hinges creaking as she pushed it open. Inside, the room was empty, dust covering every surface, as though it hadn't been touched in years. She hurried back to her room, locking the door behind her. The next morning, Emma confronted Victor Kane about the noises. His response was dismissive, his demeanor unchanging. "Old buildings make strange sounds," he said, his tone flat. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Determined to uncover the truth, Emma began to explore the motel. She found a storage room filled with abandoned belongings, suitcases, clothing, and even toys, all coated in a thick layer of dust. It was as though their owners had simply vanished, leaving everything behind. In a back room near the office, Emma discovered an old guest book. Flipping through its pages, she noticed an unsettling pattern. Every few months, a guest's name was circled in red ink. These guests had all stayed in room 6. The most recent entry, dated just 2 weeks prior, bore a chilling note next to it. "Taken." Emma's hands trembled as she closed the book. She resolved to dig deeper and find out what was truly happening at the Hollow Pines Inn. Later that day, Emma met Claire, another traveler staying in room 5. Claire was visibly shaken, admitting that she too had heard strange noises and felt an oppressive presence in her room. The two women quickly bonded over their shared unease and decided to investigate further. They drove to the nearest town to visit the local library, combing through old newspaper clippings and town records. What they found chilled them to the core. Several articles detailed mysterious disappearances linked to the Hollow Pines Inn over the past few decades. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the motel, claiming it was cursed. One article mentioned a cult that had once performed dark rituals on the land where the motel now stood, leaving it forever tainted. Emma and Claire returned to the motel with a growing sense of dread. They agreed that Victor Kane knew more than he was letting on, and they resolved to confront him. But before they could, the motel itself seemed to come alive that night, its whispers growing louder and its shadows darker. They realized they were running out of time. Determined to escape, Emma and Claire pack their belongings and prepare to leave at first light. However, as they step outside, they find the motel's surroundings have changed. The dirt driveway is now overgrown with thick, twisted roots, and the forest seems unnaturally dense, as though it has shifted to trap them. The sky above is an oppressive, stormy gray, and a strange static hum fills the air. Even the birds are silent, heightening the unnerving atmosphere. They retreat to the safety of their rooms, trying to calm their nerves. That night, the whispers grow louder, rising to a chorus of indistinct voices. The banging returns, more violent and insistent than before, rattling the walls. Shadows slither across the ceiling, and the air turns icy cold. Emma gathers her courage and pounds on Claire's door. Together, they decide that they must confront Victor Kane to get answers. Armed with flashlights and a sense of desperation, they head to the front desk. Kane is there, as if expecting them, his pale face illuminated by a single dim bulb. He smiles, a cold and knowing grin, as they demand to know what's happening. Under their relentless questioning, Kane's charming facade cracks. He admits that he is not merely the owner of the motel, but its orchestrator. Decades ago, Kane struck a bargain with a dark entity to achieve immortality. In return, he bound the land to its power, transforming the motel into a trap that feeds on the fear and despair of its guests. Those who stay too long are claimed by the shadowy dimension that exists just beyond the walls of the Hollow Pines Inn. Kane's tone shifts as he speaks, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. "You can't leave until the motel lets you," he says. "But maybe you could stay, become a part of its story. There's always room for more." His eyes gleam with a sinister light, and the shadows around him seem to stretch and twist. Emma and Claire refuse to give in to his manipulations. They notice his unease as they mention the locked door at the end of the hallway, and they press him about its significance. Kane's grin falters for the first time. "That door should never be opened," he says, his voice trembling slightly. "It's where the boundary is weakest, where this world and the other bleed together." But his warning only strengthens their resolve to uncover the motel's dark secret. That night, the tension reaches a breaking point. The whispers evolve into screams, and the banging gives way to a low, guttural growl that seems to come from deep within the motel. The lights flicker wildly, and the floorboards tremble as if something massive is stirring beneath them. Emma and Claire grab their flashlights and head for the locked door, ignoring Kane's shouted protests from the front desk. When they reach the door, the rhythmic tapping sound is deafening. The air grows thick, and a cold wind seems to seep through the cracks. Emma forces the lock open with a crowbar they found earlier, and the door creaks open to reveal a long, narrow staircase descending into darkness. A foul, earthy smell wafts up from below. As they descend, the walls seem to close in and the shadows deepen. At the bottom of the stairs, they find a room lined with ancient symbols carved into the stone. In the center stands a crude altar, its surface stained dark with what looks like dried blood. Surrounding the altar are twisted relics, cracked mirrors, rusted chains, and fragments of old photographs. The energy in the room feels oppressive, and the shadows seem to writhe as if alive. Kane's voice echoes faintly from above, pleading with them to stop. "You don't know what you're doing. If you break the seal, there's no telling what will happen." But Emma and Claire know they have no other choice. They place the gasoline they brought with them around the altar and ignite it. As the flames consume the symbols, the room begins to shake violently, and a deafening roar fills the space. The shadows lunge toward them, but as the altar collapses, the figures dissolve into smoke. They race back up the stairs, the motel trembling as though it's being torn apart. Kane is nowhere to be seen. Just as they reach the front door, the floor cracks open behind them, revealing a swirling void of darkness. Emma and Claire manage to leap through the doorway, slamming it shut behind them as the Hollow Pines Inn collapses into nothingness. Emma and Claire find themselves standing in the clearing where the Hollow Pines Inn once stood, gasping for breath. The oppressive silence of the forest is broken only by the distant sound of rustling leaves. They stumble to Emma's car, which now sits free of the tangled roots that had ensnared it. Without hesitation, Emma starts the engine, and they drive away, leaving the cursed land behind. As dawn breaks, they reach the nearest town and report the events to the authorities. When police investigate, they find no trace of the motel, only an empty patch of overgrown forest. The local sheriff listens to their story with a skeptical frown, but can offer no explanation. Emma and Claire leave the station, feeling a mix of relief and lingering dread. In the weeks that follow, Emma begins to write about their ordeal, pouring every detail into a manuscript that will later become a bestseller. Claire, however, struggles to move on. She starts having vivid nightmares of the swirling void beneath the motel, and in her waking hours, she feels as though she's being watched. The shadows in her home seem to stretch longer than they should, and the whispers sometimes return when she's alone. Months later, Emma receives an unmarked package in the mail. Inside is an old, dusty key, the key to room 6. Alongside it is a note, written in Victor Kane's familiar handwriting. "You can never truly leave." Emma's heart pounds as she reads the note. She places the key in a locked drawer, determined to forget, but the sense of unease lingers. That night, she dreams of the Hollow Pines Inn, now restored and waiting for new guests. In her dream, she hears Kane's voice, calm and chilling. Some places are meant to be found again. The story ends with a haunting image. The neon vacancy sign of the Hollow Pines Inn, flickering back to life in the middle of the forest, as if beckoning its next victims.